We can obviously save money by doing things ourselves, but should we? Before I can start moving into this new shop, I need to address some big ticket items like getting all of my lights installed ahead of getting power hooked up, painting the outside of the shop, and oh yeah, the floor. I'm going to attempt to install my own epoxy flake floor because I can't exactly call it a dream shop if I don't, right? It took 4 panic-filled days for me to do it, and I ran into one giant problem at the end. Will I finally be ready to move into this place? This video is sponsored by Mr. Cool. There are 3 major steps left before I can move into this place. I've got to get electric hooked up and everything that goes along with that. I've got to get my mini split system up and running from Mr. Cool, and I've got to get the epoxy floor laid. Oh, and I leave for Jamaica in 12 days, so I've got to do all that before then. Now, luckily, I'm already on the schedule for the electrician to come make that final connection to get power to the building. But before he gets here in the next 2 or 3 days, I want to get as much done as possible as far as outlets, switches, and most importantly, getting the lights installed. If you'll remember from the last video, which of course you do because you watch all of my videos, I took the time to carefully document the exact location of each fixture junction box in the attic before I got it covered up with drywall in a nice sketch, and then promptly forgot where I put the damn sketch. So back to square one trying to remember where the heck they were. After scrubbing through old footage and pictures in my phone, I managed to figure it out, I think. Since I'm using these flat LED recessed lights, I do have a little bit of wiggle room since I can actually fit them underneath any trusses, which I inevitably will run into. So after second guessing myself about 12 times, I decided to just send it and see what happens. I'm going to use this 6 3/8 inch drywall hole saw paired with this flexible dust bowl thingy to keep it as tidy as I can. Now this first hole was going to let me know real quick how accurate my guess was, and sure enough, it was just about right on the money. Thank God. So now, assuming my 48-inch spacing was still correct, I can move down the line on each side and knock out all 20 in this attic space. Yes, 20. After finishing the 2 puck lights in the bathroom, I moved on to the main shop area. Now in here, I'm doing something a little bit different and instead going with a more high quality LED shop light with a high CRI, or color rendering index. This means that stuff in the shop will look true to color and will look great on camera. And it probably looks like I'm just putting up a ton of these things, so let's have a little fun. How many total lumens do you think this main shop area will have when I'm done? Do you think it's over or under 100,000? Let me know down in the comments. Now you might think I decided just to go big for YouTube, but the exact number of fixtures is calculated, believe it or not. These lights are from American Green Lights, and they put together a full lighting simulation of my exact shop so that I would have the recommended 60 to 100 foot candles of light intensity in all work areas. Pretty cool actually. They made some general assumptions on where tools would go, but you can see the level of detail that these mock-ups create. Go check them out if you're looking to up your shop lighting game. With all of the light fixtures now in place, both here on the main floor and upstairs, when the power does eventually get turned on, I'm gonna have plenty of light to work in. Which, by the way, which did you take on the bet, the over or the under? If you took the over, you're correct. These 20 fixtures on the ceiling of just this main area alone will produce over 145,000 lumens of high quality, high CRI light. Now, is that overkill? Yeah, probably. So next up on the to-do list is to install this wall-mounted mini split unit that's going to go up here on the wall for this main shop area. And if you've seen previously, I actually installed a ceiling-mounted unit upstairs from Mr. Cool as well. It's all going to tie into the same system, effectively creating 2 zones in this shop. And what's really cool about Mr. Cool in particular is that anyone can install it. You do not have to be a licensed HVAC technician to put these things in, which is part of the reason why I wanted to show it off. And one of the main reasons you're able to do that is because they give you a pre-charged line set. So these are the lines that carry the refrigerant from the condenser to the evaporator or vice versa. And as you can see, I've already poked them through and ran them all the way to that ceiling unit up in the attic and left the slack down here that we're gonna eventually connect to the outdoor unit. In a traditional HVAC system, what you do is you'd run those lines and then you'd have to first create a vacuum and pull all the air out of them and then charge them with refrigerant. And that's where you need that licensed HVAC technician to help you do that. With these, it's already done for you. So right there is on the opposite side of the wall we just looked at, and that's where the head unit for this downstairs mini split system is gonna sit. So let's get that installed and then we'll hook it all up. Some of you may be asking why I'm doing a mini split at all. Why not just do conventional air conditioning? Well, besides being able to do this myself, I love the flexibility of it. You can mount these just about anywhere, and since my plans for the shop change constantly, I didn't want to commit to running ductwork and stuff too early. These Mr. Cool systems are designed to be installed in existing garages too, so I could have even waited until much later if I needed to. Plus, I can easily add another unit down the road as well. This is because all you really need is access to an outside wall, so that you can drill a hole to pass through the refrigerant lines, the drain, and the power cable. It always feels strange drilling a giant hole through a perfectly good wall, but it's the price you pay for a comfortable shop. I'll get this hole fully sealed up later. All right, so now we've got the air handlers set for both the main shop area, which is this one right here, and the upstairs attic space. Now I've already gone ahead and done all of the connections on the one upstairs, and I had to do that before drywall and insulation. So that included things like running the refrigerant line, which was a 50-foot line set that runs from the unit itself all the way outside, which you saw me talk about earlier, all the way down to the ground, and that's just kind of hanging there ready to be hooked up. But I also made up the electrical connection, which is the whip cable that comes with the kit, into the air cassette handler up in the attic, and then of course ran that cable along with the refrigerant lines through that same hole. And then back at the ceiling cassette unit, I actually made up the final refrigerant connections and then wrapped them in a soundproof covering and got it all tidied up. Now obviously all of that is covered in drywall, but all of those connections are actually still accessible at the unit should I need to change or do anything to it in the future. But now that all that's in place, the next thing I have to do is install the outdoor unit, which is gonna go right there. And I've actually got some brackets that are gonna hang off of that siding, so it's gonna hang up off the ground. This is obviously all gonna get backfilled, and then I'll just connect those refrigerant lines. But I'm gonna hold off on doing that because I've got painters coming tomorrow that are gonna prime and paint this, and I'm gonna let them get this all painted before I go putting stuff in their way. So in the meantime, I'm gonna take advantage of the nice weather as well and start prepping for doing the epoxy floors. Now originally I wanted to get my HVAC set up so that I can use that to condition the space so that I can do the floors if the weather's cold, but it is a nice 63 degrees outside. It's supposed to be 70 for the next couple days. So I'm gonna strike while the iron's hot or warm and get this thing started. As you can see, even though the slab is not very old, it's been abused during construction and finishing. Globs of drywall mud, paint, and floor adhesive are everywhere. So I wanted to get as much of the big stuff scraped off as I could. Whether you're coating a brand new floor or a 20-plus-year-old oil-stained floor, the prep work for an epoxy coating is the absolute most critical part. And since this is technically my 4th garage floor epoxy coating, I've learned to take my time here. After a quick cleanup, the real prep can begin. To get the right surface profile for epoxy, I'm going to use this floor maintainer with a diamond brush pad. When I coated my main garage floor about 4 years ago, I used a shot blaster since that floor was older and had lots of deep set stains in it. This floor was never sealed and is still pretty pristine, so I decided that this route should be good enough. The downside though is that I needed to grind the floor wet, since the diamond brushes would wear out too fast if I did it dry. Now this definitely kept the dust down, but as you'll see in a bit, led to some other issues. I did reach out to some companies to quote this prep stage, and the best price I got was $7,000 just for the prep, which is nuts for just the preparation and probably just an F-off price. So I figured a couple of $100 to rent the grinder and some elbow grease was well worth it for me. To get the edges and the little curb wall around the shop, I used a diamond wheel in my angle grinder, which paired with my little mechanic stool worked really well. and while the shop was a complete disaster, I decided to cut in the edge of the garage door opening with a cutting wheel. This small groove in the concrete adds a lot of strength to the epoxy edge and helps anchor it into the slab, making it harder to pull up the edge as things will inevitably run into it. I tried using this string as a straight edge since the concrete was wet and dirty and I couldn't really use tape, and it worked, kind of. Luckily, you won't really see this groove once we're done. The grinding and prep stage is always the most daunting, but trust me when I say it's totally worth it. What is actually more daunting, as it turns out, is the cleanup after grinding. Since I wet ground the floor, I had to wait until it dried enough to start getting the dust up, which kind of worked. I also made sure to clean out all of the expansion joints after I noticed they stayed wet for much longer than anything else. Turns out the sawdust packed in there acted like a sponge, and that's not going to be good underneath epoxy. So after lots of sweeping and fully vacuuming the floor, it looked pretty good until I bent down and rubbed my fingers across it to find a thin, hazy layer of caked on dust. So I decided to mop it. Yes, you heard me right. Since no amount of sweeping or vacuuming would get that layer off, I figured that mopping was my next best option. That didn't involve fully soaking the floor with something like a pressure washer. Remember, I'm on a tight deadline and I didn't have the luxury of days to wait for the floor to fully dry out. The surface water from the mop quickly dries and it seemed to work. And also, I did do a moisture test on the slab to make sure it was fully dry before adding any coating. The next day I got to work taping off the walls and any areas I did not want epoxy to go. It turns out the colors of painter's tape definitely does matter, which I find out later, but this green stuff did work really well on the concrete walls. The epoxy system I'm using is from Ligari, and step 1 is this 2-part primer. I use Ligari epoxy in my main garage and it turned out so well that I wanted to do the same in this new shop. It's so much higher quality than that garbage you can buy at the big box stores, ask me how I know, and Ligari will sell to DIYers, which is really cool, because a professionally applied epoxy coating will run you anywhere from $6 to $10 per square foot, while something like this is only $2 to $3 per square foot. The downside to doing it yourself though is that it's stressful. It's stressful because it's messy. It requires a ton of upfront planning and preparation, and every coating step has a pretty short working time. Now, ideally, I'd have someone helping me here, but I'm stubborn and I like to suffer alone, I guess. Luckily, the primer has the longest working time, so I was able to easily get this 1,000 square foot floor laid out between 2 3-gallon batches. And oddly enough, the outside of the shop was also getting primed at this exact same time because I thought, why not add another layer to the chaos? As I mentioned before, we're going to be painting the shop to match our house, so the cedar needs to be prepped with this tinted primer first. After a well-deserved lunch break and a couple of hours for the floor primer to set up, it's time for the most stressful part, and that is the epoxy coating itself. It's stressful because the epoxy will actually start to kick in the mixing bucket really quickly. So you've got to get it fully mixed and then out on the floor as soon as possible. Because of this, I actually got a couple of batches started so that I can go back and mix them quickly later. Once it is dumped out, I spread it out evenly with a squeegee across the floor section so it's not too thick in any one spot. And then I roll it out smooth with a big 18-inch roller. But you're not done. With the clock still ticking, you need to add the colored flakes to the wet epoxy as evenly as you can, but keeping a wet edge so that you can tie in the next section as you move along. And you're doing this all while walking around on spike shoes with zero grip, trying not to faceplant in it. Fun times. With the entire floor now done and almost 160 pounds of flakes added, I left it to cure for 24 hours. After the epoxy was fully set, the next step was to scrape off the excess flakes, and boy was it a lot of them. I've learned after doing this a couple of times to go heavy with the flakes to avoid bare spots. I made sure to scrape up the entire floor in 2 different directions just to get everything nice and flat. And with all of the excess flakes now removed, I can apply the final coating, which is called polyaspartic. It's a really durable top layer that is UV resistant and puts the finishing touch on things by smoothing out the uneven flake layer. This stuff is pretty nasty though, so I made sure to wear a respirator while applying it. It isn't quite as viscous as the epoxy, so spreading it out evenly is much easier using the same squeegee and roller method we used before. And just as I was finishing, I got a notification that FedEx was delivering my brand new dust collection system from Oneida, which is super exciting and gives me a little extra nudge of motivation because I have to, put this somewhere. So after 4 days of what was mostly prep work, I'm left with a really nice epoxy floor. Now this is something that always looks really nice once it's done, and you always walk into someone's shop or their garage and you're like, man, I wish I did that to mine. And it's obviously a lot of work, but in my opinion, it's well worth it. But it didn't look quite this good when I first saw it after it was curing. The next day following that top coat of polyaspartic coating on this floor, I came in to check it out and was a little bit surprised to find that all of the cracks, the expansion joints in the slab, had this kind of bubbling up effect, which is weird because the rest of the floor looked totally fine. And apparently, if you don't seal up those expansion joint cracks, you can apply it a little bit too thick in those areas because it kind of runs down in there, and then it will off gas and kind of bubble up. So my mistake, but I went back and just kind of scraped them all off. Looks totally fine. I may go back and sand those and sort of do a skim coat to fully seal it, but for now it's gonna be totally fine for getting stuff moved in here. Oh, and also, if you're gonna be taping on the walls, use the blue painter's tape. That orange stuff I used was super sticky and took off a bunch of paint. Not gonna be a huge deal for me because I'm gonna trim all of that out anyways, but just beware, that orange tape sticks. All right, so far we've got our lights installed everywhere. We've got our floor done. The last thing we need before we can truly move into this place is to finish up that mini split installation. And that starts with getting the outdoor unit mounted here. You can see they've already done most of the painting, so I can go ahead and mount the bracket against the wall. So we'll do that first. Since the outdoor unit is pretty heavy, I made sure to add some blocking in the walls here during the framing stage so that these lag screws have plenty of meat to grab into. You can of course set this unit on a small concrete pad as well, but for me these brackets made the most sense. Before I moved the unit into place, I decided to address the lines coming out of the walls first. To give it more of a tidy appearance, I'm going to be covering them in these line set covers from Mr. Cool. And yes, I'll eventually paint them to match the siding so they disappear a bit more. You can already see how much better it looks, and I'll do the exact same thing for the wall-mounted unit lines down here. But first, I needed to connect the pre-charged line set and get the connections wrapped in this sound-deadening material. Then I could get everything situated and hidden behind a short run of this cover. I gotta say, this back wall is already looking much better. To get the outdoor unit set in place, I decided to ask the painters if they could help me out. It turns out this thing is really heavy, and the terrain around the bracket isn't exactly flat. After a bit of a struggle, we got it up there and bolted down into place. The only thing left to do is get the main power connected to this AC disconnect I installed earlier, and then of course to make up all of the electrical and refrigerant connections to the unit itself. Mr. Cool makes this super easy for just about anyone to do. And then after opening the king valves in each of the connections, I did a quick leak check with some soapy water and got everything covered up. All right, with all of that in place, all the connections made up, now would be the time where I could bask in the conditioned air of my new shop. There's just one tiny little problem. I don't have power to my building yet, so that part is gonna have to wait. But if you wanna check out air conditioning for your shop, whether you're in a 50-year-old garage or you're building a new shop like I am, go check out Mr. Cool. Go to mrcooldiy.com to see all of the different options. Whether you want to do ceiling cassette units or wall-mounted units or a mixture of both, they have got an option for you. That's mrcooldiy.com. Go check it out. This place is really starting to come together. The outside is starting to match our house and is looking awesome. These guys from Miami Valley Premier Painting knocked it out of the park. I'll admit, I tossed around the idea of trying to paint this myself, but after watching them do it, I'm really glad I decided against the DIY approach here. I find that one of the hardest parts of doing projects like this is balancing between wanting to do it all yourself and realizing your time is probably better spent elsewhere. All right, with that last item checked off our list, we are officially ready to start moving in here. Now, does that mean the shop's done? No, not even close. But all of the major stuff is done where we can actually start moving in and start using it in parallel with continuing to build it. So of course, lots left to do. I'll catch you guys in the next one where we start moving stuff in here, including some of that delivery we just got. And until next time, keep pursuing shop greatness.